The Keir Starmer drama. Instead of paving the way for its upcoming budget or selling its new immigration plan, the British Labour Party is preoccupied, putting out internal fires. Prime Minister Starmer's approval rating is at an historic low and mutterings of a leadership challenge at an historic high. Is he on the way out? You're watching Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nusafora. It's hard to imagine winning an election in a landslide and just 16 months later, worrying you're about to get rolled.
The real scandal is that 2 weeks from a budget, the government has descended into civil war. Instead of fixing the mess they've made of the economy, they're all... Mr. Speaker, they're all chuntering. These are the feral MPs that Number 10 has been talking about. They're not my words. They're Number 10's words, his words.
Mr. Speaker, this is a united team and we are delivering together. Look what we're doing.
The UK PM is in an unenviable position. The latest IPSOS poll found Starmer's satisfaction rating is the lowest of any leader since the survey began in 1977. And the Labour Party now only has the support of 18% of intended voters. So perhaps it's no surprise there have been leadership rumblings. But in an attempt to stamp out speculation, Downing Street has amplified the crisis and fuelled media speculation. Coming up, we'll ask, is Keir Starmer's leadership over? Are the UK politicians and its political system fit for purpose? And could reform be on track for Downing Street? Joining us for this discussion on the Prime Minister's leadership, Gwaine Towler, a political strategist who serves on Reform UK's Board of Governors. James Schneider is joining us, Communications Director for the Progressive International and a former campaign director for the previous Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. And Daniel Shearer is rounding out our panel of former Labour Party parliamentary candidate who writes on his The Party Line Substack. Gentlemen, welcome to Counterpoints and thanks so much for being here. Well, political honeymoons are never that long-lived, but Keir Starmer's has been shockingly short, if we're being honest. From ushering Labor to a landslide victory to a record-breakingly low satisfaction rating just over a year later. The PM has been blamed for failing to pull the UK government out of gloom and reduce the number of small boats crossing the Channel. He's also been criticised by some for being abroad too often and neglecting domestic issues. So, Daniel, let's start with you. Is Keir Starmer's leadership over?
No, he's still Prime Minister, he's still leader of the Labour Party. I think he still commands the respect of members and of the House of Commons. I think, he's just getting on with the job of being Prime Minister. And, we could talk about opinion polls and approval ratings all we like. I think those only matter if an election is imminent, but election is 4 years away.
What do you think, Gwaine, when we hear only a little over a year after the job that there's leadership mutterings? Does it make you think that his days as leader is numbered?
I don't think his days, well, everybody in politics' days are numbered. It just depends how long those days are. But I don't think his days are numbered quite now. I think the great threats to him are, well, I heard an interview with Andy Burnham today, the Mayor of Manchester, who's perceived as this great threat. And his ability not to answer the question has fatally undermined him, I believe. So that threat is, I think, not a threat. And then you've got the former Deputy Prime Minister, Ange. She may be on manoeuvres with the Tribune Group, but I don't think that's got the legs to do it. No, truly, yes, his policies, his government are in a mess, but our constitution rather makes it difficult. And the 80 signatures required, I don't think are there. So he's not done yet.
Round us out on your thoughts on that one, James. How's he sitting? Is it an uncomfortable leadership position at the moment?
It's extremely uncomfortable, and the majority doesn't matter, just as in the last government, which had a majority of 80, went through a number of prime ministers in quick succession. When the underlying conditions in the country are bad and life is getting worse for most people, and you have a government which has basically no idea how to do anything about it, then that creates political volatility. So it's not surprising that after an unbelievably loveless landslide, I mean, Labour got a third of the votes on a very low turnout and 2/3 of the seats, and then have done everything possible really since then to make themselves more unpopular and not deliver on the basic thing that they said they would do, which was change. That was the one word on the front of the manifesto. And instead we sort of have a continuity government with Sunak, with a focus on supposed deliverism, delivering very little apart from poll leads to reform.
Daniel, what do you think about that statement? I mean, the public obviously seem dissatisfied, or else these stories wouldn't be continuously reported. Are they dissatisfied with Starmer because he hasn't produced the change that James was saying?
Yeah, I think people are dissatisfied. I think there's a sense that Britain is broken. And, you know, we've gone through, 6 or 7 prime ministers in quick succession. And, you know, changing the leader hasn't really delivered that change. Not least for the Conservatives. I don't think it would do for the Labour Party either. But change is hard. You know, when you've had basically, you know, probably 2 lost decades, you can't simply get in for 12 months and turn things around. You know, the ship needs to be turned around, and it is being turned around, but it's a bit like an oil tanker. You won't see that effect until multiple years into the Parliament. So my hope
is that being too generous? I mean, change needs to come from the top, and have we seen enough change in his leadership style compared to what people were expecting?
Well, I think it's less about style and more about substance when we were talking about change. And I think we have started to see some of that change coming through already. I mean, just last week, we had the news that police and crime commissioners were being scrapped. That money is going directly into frontline policing. I think that's a change that everyone would agree with. I think, you know, we've got things like the New Deal for working people that are going to enshrine greater rights for people at work. I think that's the change that people want to see from a Labour government. We've had, you know, record investment into the NHS. Wes Streeting is doing a great job on getting NHS waiting lists down. So look, we are starting to see some of those quick wins come through, but the longer term change will take time.
Gwaine, what do you think? Change in slogan or change in deliverables?
I think what I think is one of the disasters of this government is its complete inability to send a straight message. You have, this week was a classic case in point. The Home Secretary makes a statement that's not popular with everybody in the Labour Party, but is wildly popular in the country at large about asylum and immigration. And in the midst of all that, Number 10 puts out a message saying, "I'm keeping my job, I'm not going to stand down," completely undermining the positivity that had built in the country. And the reason we are currently talking about a possible leadership thing is because the Number 10 itself put out a statement saying people are after my job. The first rule in political PR, as far as I understand it, is do not advertise bad news. And he has a Number 10 that seems to be like Charles Saatchi advertising at the top of their voice. I don't know. Are they going for a job with the Coca-Cola Corporation? It seems to me that their messaging is a disaster. So are, frankly, in the last year, so have their policies. According to one opinion poll, the Prime Minister is less popular than Prince Andrew.
Well, that's a stark comparison, isn't it?
It's extraordinary in a politician, particularly one who's only been in government for a year and a half.
James, what do you think about this idea of change as a slogan versus change in actual deliverables? Do you think the Labour Party has lived up to that with Keir Starmer at the front, or is a year just not long enough, as what Daniel was saying, to re-steer the oil tanker?
Daniel's right that after basically 2 lost decades, it's going to take some time to bear significant fruit. But I think he's being hugely overgenerous because you'd have to have actually started moving the ship significantly, and scrapping police and crime commissioners, while maybe something that we all agree with, is hardly a particularly significant thing. We haven't seen efforts by the government to fundamentally take on the entrenched wealth and power of the very few, which is what is going to be needed in order to boost living standards for the majority. In those 2 lost decades that Daniel points to, where we have seen pay for the majority of people not rise, where we've seen public services be underfunded and fall behind, where we've seen our infrastructure creak and groan under age, where we've seen our rivers and seas pumped full of excrement by our rip-off privatized water companies, the wealth of the super rich has gone up dramatically. And unless you have a government which is willing to engage with that central point, which our government is not, as you see on issue after issue, take an issue which probably the three of us would actually agree on, because our actual position is in line with about 85% of people in the country. Water companies should be in public hands. It's an absolute farce that they're privatized, that over £70 billion has been shipped off to shareholders in dividends, while debts have been racked up of an equivalent sum, over 70 billion, and the service that we get is very bad, and the amount of money people are going to spend on bills is going up by 40%. Mm-hmm. It's completely obvious to take over these companies, but the Labour Party will not put forward that policy because it is captured by corporate lobbyists. So the change that is needed, which is big change, and that will take some time, you actually have to start doing it. And Labour have no policies to do so, really, fundamentally, or very few, and don't have the will to do so either.
Dan, I want you to pick up on some of what James has said there. I also want to circle back to what Gwaine was saying about briefing against ministers coming out and saying that my leadership is not under threat, when no one else was really talking about it that much until Downing Street started talking about it. Has this been a mishandling by the Prime Minister that has shown that perhaps maybe he doesn't have the leadership chops that people were expecting? Was this a big own goal?
Well, I don't think it came from the Prime Minister. I mean, allegedly it's said to have come from Number 10. So we don't even know where these rumours came from in the first place. So I don't think it would be fair to say they came from Keir Starmer somehow. But I do want to go back to James's point around nationalisation of water. I think many people in this country understand that natural monopolies should belong in common ownership. What form that takes, I think we can have a good, strong debate about. But fundamentally, I think you need the money to do that, right? And I think at the moment, if we were to say, right, what are our priorities? It's not that we wouldn't want to do nationalisation of water. It's that other stuff would take precedence. Already we're in a really dire fiscal position. Any extra borrowing is likely to be met with an increase in gilt yields. That's going to mean that we spend more as a country on debt interest. I want to put that money into public services, into the NHS, into policing, to get more bobbies on the beat. I think these are the practical considerations that we need to make first. And then once we've actually fixed the foundations, once we've actually got the books in order, I think then we can start looking at these big grand projects like the nationalisation of the water companies. So,
Can I come back on
politics is a language of priorities. And I think, this government's priorities are clear. It's stability.
Yep.
So just to come back on this canard that water privatisation, public ownership of water would be expensive, it would save us as a country money. The share price is set by Parliament. We would stop handing out dividends to shareholders. Instead, that money could go to reducing people's bills. That's more money in ordinary people's pockets to spend in the economy. Or it could go to upgrading the services that we need. The price at which we would pay for it would be set by Parliament, like in all other nationalisations. And when you have an ambitious government which is trying to change the course of the country, like we had after World War II, when we had far higher levels of debt, you can do things with public money which are going to boost the overall growth in the economy and are going to reduce the cost of living for people, which is what we did in 1945 in much harder conditions, and we could do so again. There is no trade-off between bringing water or other natural monopolies, as you exactly say, which are more efficiently run in common ownership, without this money being leached off into private shareholders. If you take our privatised utilities, it's over £200 billion since privatisation. That's money which is going out to people that do not need it, and instead it's raising the bills for ordinary people. That doesn't cut across putting money into social care or the NHS or anything else.
Gwaine, what do you make of this talk of putting these things back in the people's hands?
I'm not 100% opposed to the water. I think that may well be a natural monopoly, but I'm a little bit wary about various other nationalisations. Though I think one thing that was said earlier that is very telling. We have a government of it's not possible. You cannot inspire a people, but when a question is, can you do this? You want to do this? No, we can't. There's the imagination required, the planning required, just does not seem to have taken place. And so we're going back to the idea of this government, Keir Starmer's leadership. Leadership actually requires a plan, and to follow that plan and to stick with that plan and to take people with you. And it is transparently obvious that this government did not have a plan. It thought that Sue Gray had a plan. She didn't have a plan. Everybody in the country, everybody knew that Labour was going to win 2 years out before the last general election. And it seems in that time, they maintained campaign mode rather than plan mode. And in fact, to a certain extent, they tried to continue campaigning. But you can't campaign once you're in government. And what you seem to have, there is this, can you do this? No, we can't. The civil service tell us we can't. And there doesn't seem to be that drive and that ambition from various departments in government. And it's not just the Prime Minister, it's across the board, where there's the no can do attitude rather than a can-do attitude. And that dispirits the public. It certainly dispirits those people who voted for Labour. The polling rating has fallen off a cliff, not just for the Prime Minister, but for Labour as a whole. And I think that's largely due to the fact that there's been a no can-do approach.
I think this is the issue that we maybe see with reform at the moment, that they're stuck between two attack lines. The first is that Labour has no plan, they have no direction, they don't know what we're going. And the other attack line is that, the stuff that Labour is doing isn't working, that it's not good. Which is it?
Winter fuel allowance? It clearly was something that you weren't planned for, and a whole bunch of promises made at the general election that you've rescinded on. You've got a budget that has gone in
where have we broken the manifesto?
It's been announced. So, and it's hard.
Just tell me one example of where we've broken the manifesto.
Well, you said you weren't going to increase taxes on working people. Well, and in fact, the NIC on employment does increase tax on working people, and everybody accepts it. It wasn't a clever little get-out clause.
But that's paid by employers, not by employees. I mean, people, wouldn't have seen their pay.
And the little clever little, oh, aren't we clever attitude at the time. No, it affects working people just as badly. And so just because we think we've been smart because we use a slightly different combination of words, doesn't come across that way. The farmers were told they would not be hit. They were. Up and down, across the board, there have been these problems. Now, it's a tough job. You came in, it's difficult. I actually think that the Labour Party still has a bit of time blaming the Tories. It doesn't have an entire 5 years, but it certainly does. The Tories made a hash of things, and Labour's trying to pick up the pieces. We get that. But it doesn't seem to be making a very good fist of it. And those blaming others only works for so long. And that often does work if you can see successes in other areas. And I don't think we've seen them. So the public's patience has run out very fast with this government.
We've been talking about Keir Starmer's leadership and speculation around that, but our conversation has moved on to the Labor Party itself. So let's move ahead to the second sort of chapter of our debate, where I think I want to pick up exactly on what you were saying there, Gwaine, whether or not Labor has direction and they're pulling their voters with it, because perhaps changing leader isn't really going to solve Labor's problems here. As a party, people say that they're not living up to the groundswell of support they received at last year's election. There have been revolts within the party over proposed welfare reforms, tax policies, its new immigration plan, and what's been described as a toxic culture at number 10. Labor's slogan, as we were talking about earlier at the election, was change begins. But some voters are saying that as a government, the party has failed to change anything and address these pressing problems. So, James, are these issues that the UK is currently facing economy, immigration. Are they too severe for our current political system to address? Does it need to be rebuilt, or is it just the case that politicians themselves aren't up to these challenges?
Well, those two things are deeply related. We have a very bad political system which is captured predominantly by the power of corporate lobbyists who have interests in preventing the sorts of policies that will redress power and wealth from those that have it to the overwhelming majority of people, which is what you need to have a functioning economy, is money in people's pockets for them to go out to work and have a bit of money to save and a bit of money to spend. And of course, after 20 years, Dan laid out well earlier on the difficulties that we have in the country after basically pretty difficult 2 decades. But if we had different political priorities, we could get going with those things. But both the Tories and Labour and Reform pretty much have similar priorities on whether you're going to try to tax the rich, what you're going to do with bankers, and so on and so forth. And their priorities are quite clear, and they're not ones which are going to alter the trajectory for most people in the country.
Does anyone want to pick up on that? Daniel, what do you think?
Well, look, I think we started off by saying that, Britain's had 2 lost decades. I'd sort of use the analogy that Britain is a broken down car at the moment. And I think you've got 2 different approaches to moving forward. Somebody says, let's change the driver. Another person says, let's change the direction. It doesn't matter because the engine is broken. And it's only by fixing the engine, of doing the long, hard, difficult work of steering the oil tanker, of getting the fiscal position in order. It's only by doing those things that we can then start to move forward. And I think once we fix the engine, then we can have better conversations around the direction, about momentum, about how fast we go. But fundamentally, I think we need to be honest with ourselves as a country that things aren't great. It wouldn't have mattered to an extent who would have come in. They would have all faced the same challenges. And I think that the difference between the parties, I think this is the point where I disagree with James. I do think there were different choices on offer at the last general election. I think you had a clear stall set out by all 3 parties. And I think, the public knew what they were voting for. They knew they were voting for the change that the Labour was bringing. But at no point have we ever said day one everything's going to be all singing, all dancing. Just get rid of the Tories and it's all going to be fine. I think Rachel Reeves spoke about fixing the foundations in her first budget. I think that is a really key line that I think is going to define the first few years of this government, because you can't move forward if you haven't fixed the engine. You can't move forward if you haven't fixed the foundations first.
Is there an issue, though? Go ahead, Gwen.
Well, I would just say, you're talking about this with this metaphor of fixing the engine before you decide what direction you want to drive. I would have thought you want to know which way you want to go before you fix the engine, because what's the point of bothering to fix the engine if you don't know where you're going with it? It seems to be that the cart is literally before the horse, or in this instance. I think you need, in order to take the country with you, you've got to show a vision of what you want the country to look like. And I don't know anybody who can tell me what that vision is with this current government. And so that, I think, is a fundamental problem that you're facing.
And even on things which are positive, the government has decided to not jump up and down about it. I remember in the first week of September, the previous government, the previous Conservative government, had a good but limited policy to expand free childcare, but wasn't able to implement it. And then the Labour government came in and has been able to implement it. And the first week of September was the first time when I was getting, WhatsApp messages from non-political friends and seeing it in football team WhatsApp groups and stuff, of people taking their toddlers to nursery school and getting something good, a good thing for the first time happening, first time in a long time, something good. And what did Labour spend that week talking about in its grid? Migration. It didn't spend a week going on about nursery and early years and childcare and making sure that they had, a day on all of the troubles, how difficult it is to recruit staff, but here's what we're doing about it, and having Keir Starmer out in a creche talking about this, that, and the other. They went totally driven by what they see as reform's priorities and obsessed with not losing votes to reform. The way in which they're obsessed with not losing votes to reform is getting more votes to reform and making when they do some things which are good, nobody, they don't take credit for them.
No, I'd say the deal with India was a good deal, but they allowed it to be ruined by one paragraph.
But James, I think in a way you've kind of answered your own question there, which was, you saw people talking about the great things that the Labour government was doing. I think we can all, debate over the style and the comms strategies of this government, but you can't argue with the substance. It's getting cut through. And I think regardless of how you dress up a policy, at the end of the day, what people are going to vote on in 4 years' time is, have their lives got better? And if people, in those football teams, in those WhatsApps are saying, well, actually, the Labour government's given me more childcare, that's put more money in my pocket, that's the difference, that's the change that people are seeing, right? So, if that already gets through, then why do we need to have Keir Starmer in schools or at creches? I mean, it's already got cut through, to your point.
Dan, I half expect that, and I think it is very admirable that you're pushing on the substance, and I think that's half right, but it falls down on 2 points. One, you do need to have a story which knits together the different things that you're doing to give people hope that lives will get better, especially in the context where objectively living standards are set to continue falling for the majority of people until the end of this decade. So yes, that is a good policy that has been brought forward, which will make things better for a decent chunk of people, but against the backdrop of other things getting worse. So you need, not just one policy that is making things better for people. You need 10 or 20, and you do need to have a story to tell about it. At the moment, Labour have one or two things which are making things better in the face of huge headwinds, where you're having to push things uphill. And then no story about it, which, let's take birth rates, for example, which are one metric which you can use for how people feel about the future. Since 2022, when we had the huge spike in inflation, birth rates have fallen further in Britain, in part because lots of people, let's say around my age, looking around and thinking, what is life going to be like for the next 10, 15 years? Is it going to get better or is it going to get worse? And you do need to have some content which shows it's going to get better and then a story about it. At the moment, there's not enough content and there's no story.
But in a sense, though, I think, in politics, you never get to choose the hand you're dealt, right? And I think with this particular government coming at this particular time, loads of different things are broken. And that's why Keir Starmer's story isn't anything specific. It has to be quite broad. And that's why we hear more about this phrase, national renewal. It's a admission that, there are deep-seated problems in this country, in our economy, in our society. The only way we can fix those problems is through institutional reform, is through national renewal. We are starting to see more about that, but we're not telling a short story here. We're telling a three-part novel.
Dan, can you lay out some of those policies which are doing national renewal? Because I'm interested, and also the government don't lay it out very well. You're doing a more convincing job. What are these big building blocks for national renewal that we're supposedly seeing?
Well, I think, it goes back to what we were saying before, which is you need to have stability in the public finances. We are spending £300 million a day in debt interest. I want to see that money going to public services instead, and potentially to get taxes down as well. We need to fix the foundations first. That's the immediate challenge before us. That's fixing the engine. Once we've fixed the engine, then we can decide where we want to go on holiday with the car. But until we actually, fix the engine, then I think discussions of whether we go to Lanzarote or Skegness are kind of moot.
Well, and surely, I mean, you talk about economic stability. You literally are having a laugh. This government is as unstable as Liz Truss's was. The gilt yields are worse and have gone on for longer. The problems we've got at the economic level are absolutely terrifying. And the fact that the government has flip-flopped 3 or 4 times in the last 2 weeks over suggested ideas in the budget gives nobody confidence. Not me, not you, not the bond market, nobody. No business is happy. No, nothing is comfortable about investing in the future. And James is right. Look at birth rates. People aren't choosing to have children because they do not see a future as something they wish to bring children into. That is terrifying for society. And the very idea that Rachel Reeves is making the economy stable in some way is for the birds.
What do you think is at the root of those economic issues that the UK is facing, Wayne?
Well, we're spending more than we're taking in and have been doing for an awfully long time. And you have 2 choices. Either you tax yourself to prosperity, which we all know is impossible, or you reduce the amount of things you're trying to spend. And Labour tried to reduce the increase in spending, and its own backbenchers wouldn't let it do so. So it is caught in a trap of its own making. So we've got to stop spending so much.
So, I mean, it does sound like there is an identity crisis. Daniel, I mean, if no one knows which way this car is pointing, how is anyone going to follow along?
Well, that's a great question. And I think, as I said, Labour is at the moment taking the unpopular decisions. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing at the moment play through. But those unpopular decisions are in the national interest. That's what is driving national renewal. And I think, Gawain, you're right in the sense that either we need to raise taxes or we need to cut spending. That's a decision that Rachel Reeves is making, and that is a direction of travel. I think the direction of travel is clear that we're not returning to austerity. That is a political choice. We are looking at ways to raise taxes in a fairer, more progressive way, as Labour governments have done previously. So I think, you do see a direction of travel, you do see a vision, but you see that vision portioned in pragmatic optimism. Pragmatism in the sense of doing what is going to work, but optimism in the sense that we are doing these decisions because we believe that they will pay off and make us all richer in the long run.
I mean, when we talk about the policies and the internal bickering about these policies, the immigration policy is another one that's caused an internal division. It's raised eyebrows about the identity of the Labor Party. Gawain, do you think this is an example of the Labor Party trying to sing from Reform's playbook, as what James was saying? Are they trying to steal some voters back? Is immigration really that big of an issue to people at home?
Yes, it's a huge issue, and it really is. And there is a very good reason why Reform are 10, 12, 14 points ahead of Labour in the polls, and that is largely because people are very worried about immigration. But I think James might even agree with me on here. They can't chase in both directions. They are not just losing votes and supports to Reform, they're losing votes and supports to the Green Party under Zach Belansky. They're losing the possibility of your party as well. You've also got the independents, the Morgaza Independent Group. And so Labour are in a very, very difficult position. The rhetoric is pointed in the direction of people like me and the Reform on migration, on things of this sort. But their spending plans, it's something that the great cost is the welfare state. If you really want to spend money to invest in the country, and you're coming from a Labour background, an old traditional left of centre background, rather than talking about welfare and paying things of that sort, you should be talking about investment in infrastructure and that sort of spending that has returns, rather than spending that is spent then and finished. And so I think there's a priority problem. They see the threat of Reform, and thus you have the comments about migration. But equally, they've got this possibly even greater electoral threat to Labour on their left. And they're at a crossroads and their eyes are spinning. I don't think they know where they're going because they cannot see a way out of this problem. Now, obviously, I have my perspective, but I'm not the person in government. government is hard. Government choices are difficult. We all understand that. But currently, it's rabbit in the headlights time. I don't think anybody knows which way they're going to go.
James, do you think that immigration is as much of a problem as Gwaine is saying there? And do you think that the Labor Party was right to be focusing as tough on it as they have?
No and no. I don't think that refugees and I don't think that migrants are responsible for the 20 years of decline that the majority of people have had in the country, and which correlates totally with the wealth of the super rich. We're talking people with tens of millions and billions of pounds soaring away. The biggest policy we've had in the last 20 years is quantitative easing, which has inflated the asset prices. Basically, people who have a lot of wealth have a lot more wealth because of a policy that was carried out by the British state, and there's been no effort to claw that back. Now, Labour don't have any policies to deal with that fundamental point. They don't want to. They don't want to take on, because it's difficult, the entrenched power and wealth of the very few. Also, they are significantly captured by corporate lobbyists who don't want them to do that. Also, that is not Treasury orthodoxy that has also captured them. So instead, they are following the line well laid out by, again, the billionaire-owned press and the right of politics, which also doesn't have an idea for how to make billionaires pay more tax because they're funded by billionaires, and so point to migration being the great problem. So no, to the first half of your question, no, I don't think migration is the great problem in our society at all. Do I think it is a good electoral strategy for Labour to be going hard on immigration and against refugees? No, I do not, because if that is your top issue, if the small boats is absolutely your top issue, why would you vote for the half-fat version of Keir Starmer and Shabana Mahmood when you can vote for the full-fat version of Nigel Farage? Labour needs to have something which it stands for, which, with all respect to Dan, who is presenting this national renewal, it needs to be way more visible than it currently is. Because at the moment, fundamentally, you have Reform and the right of politics who make what is essentially an economic argument. And their economic argument is the reason why life is getting worse, and they agree life is getting worse, is because of migration. That is essentially their economic argument.
We would say it's one of the reasons, but it's
one of the reasons. I'm zooming out. I'm not. This doesn't give all of the nuance and detail, but zooming out. And Labour's is similar to the previous Tory government. Oh well, it's very difficult, and actually things are actually maybe getting better, and we don't really know. And then on the left, you're starting to get an argument, especially with Zach Polansky and the Greens, which points much more in the direction that I think the truth is, which is the problem is that so much of the economy has been captured by a very small number of people, and too much of our economy is structured towards increasing the asset prices of people who hold a lot of wealth, rather than investing into the real economy, both in terms of production and things for people to make and buy, but also into our infrastructure.
So, Gwaine, is immigration just an easy election grab? Obviously, you even said yourself it's more nuanced. It's a very important matter.
It's an extremely important matter, but it's not the only matter. I would think economically, the biggest single issue is the price of energy, because nothing works unless you can afford to power it. And that could be house building, where there will be a huge problem with house building and the infrastructure there, whether it be industry, we want to reindustrialize and go into production and productivity. All of this relies on cheaper, reliable energy, and we're certainly not getting that with this government. So yes, immigration is a big issue. It's a very, very febrile topic, and it is an important one, but it's certainly not the only one. And economically, though it does have an impact, of course, if you bring 1 million people into the country in a year, you're going to have problems and pressures on house prices, pressures on housing. Of course you are. It's just basic economics. However, that's not the only thing. It really isn't. And there's been, we feel, a series of disasters, a pandering to certain lobbies, not just the super rich, but also the welfare lobby that is demanding more and more and more on the welfare side. And welfare, if you look at one of the floats for the budget is the 3.8% increase for welfare recipients, but a cut in the, well, a stick on the amount you pay on tax. So therefore, the tax rates are essentially going up, while welfare rates are going up. So this is a problem. It's not all about migration, though migration is clearly a key issue.
We've started talking about reform and its policy, so let's round out our debate with that as our final chapter, because if the polls are to be believed, the one party that people do feel as if it has a plan to deliver change is Reform. It's polling, as you've said, Gwen, well ahead of the two major parties right now. So, Daniel, are the polls correct? Is Reform on track to de-seat Labor and secure government?
Well, I think there's one poll that is really important at the moment, which is who do people prefer as their prime minister? Because ultimately, general elections, as we know, it's about the direction we want the country to go in. It's about who we want our prime minister. And every day of the week, Keir Starmer beats Nigel Farage. So that's the poll I will be looking very closely at. If there were a general election tomorrow, if we heard the different parties set out the stall, I think people would choose Keir Starmer. I think what we're seeing right now in the polls is dissatisfaction. It's people shopping around, maybe being a bit more fluid with their party allegiances because, you know, things are bleak. And they haven't seen that change from Labour yet because it will take time. So I think there's a right and a wrong way to look at the polls. But look, there's only one poll that matters, and that's the poll on election day.
Gwen, what's your response to that?
Well, yes, of course. Hubris tells us not to be fat-headed about things like this. It's a long, long way before a general election. It's 3 years, I suspect, at least. As all
do
those
people prefer Keir Starmer to Nigel Farage? Is he a problem?
I think
is he a problem?
The polls on that have been narrowing fast over the last year, so I wouldn't be too complacent about that either. But Daniel, look. Farage is a Marmite figure. I suppose you might say Vegemite, but he is a Marmite figure, and but that is changing. There was a very interesting thing said by Luke Trill a couple of days ago when I heard him speaking. He's a major pollster. And he was talking about this infighting in Number 10 and the leadership squabbles and all the rest of it. And one of the things he said is, it doesn't make that much difference in polling, but what it does, it takes away the risk factor in voting for somebody like Zach Polanski or Reform, the Greens or Reform. Because the risk factor is, look, we don't know who these people are. They've never done it before. Do we trust them? Bit risky. And so people don't necessarily vote for Reform or the Greens. But if the current government is already tearing shreds off each other, only a year and a half into their term in office, then that risk, well, you know what, people might say, is the risk of voting for Reform. Well, the government are at sixths and sevens. How can they do worse? And so what you're seeing and the spectacle of Labour at each other's throats, the ferrets and the sack stuff, doesn't necessarily mean people will vote for Reform, but it does mean that voting Reform is no longer the risky option that I think people have thought before. It becomes less risky because the government is in such a mess.
James, is it becoming less risky to vote for Reform?
I would never advise anybody to vote Reform, but Gawain's analysis is certainly correct. I mean, the idea that the grown-ups are in charge is, of course, rendered absurd every single day you look at what's happening in the news. And I think that also cuts both ways. If you look at the polling right now, yes, Reform are out in ahead, and then four parties are all clustered together in the teens. You've got the Lib Dems, Greens, Labour, and the Tories are all somewhere in the teens. And at the moment, the Greens have quite a strong narrative. They're putting forward a bold case about what they think is wrong with the country. It's the polar opposite of Reform, apart from the fact that they are really making an argument and getting people to sit up and take notice, which Reform has done. And that could continue, so the Greens could come out ahead, at which point you've got a very interesting political dynamic taking place.
Gwen, Danny Kruger recent defector to Reform and current MP, last month described the party as a bit of a pirate ship with an ill-disciplined crew and a buccaneering captain. If even he is describing the party as that, are they really a safer option as you've described them?
Well, Danny was describing what we were and how we were in the past, and I think there was some truth in that. I mean, there's no doubt that I would say buccaneering rather than pirates, privateers, more Drake than that guy with a great...
Drake was a pirate too.
On his beard. But no, it is absolutely the case with Reform that we are well aware that we need to develop a policy platform properly. We need to have far more and more respectable and more recognisable personnel. But this is a hole in our armour that we are in the process of filling, and that's the whole point. Being aware of your failings is a good start to improve upon them. And I think that is what he was highlighting. He was looking at the past rather than today.
Okay. Daniel, has Labor, has their infighting, their focus on immigration, have they played into Reform's hands here? Are they promoting something that isn't their core policy?
Well, I think people care about immigration. We live in a democratic country. The Labour Party is a party of government, and it's a party of the people's priorities. That means taking immigration seriously. But if you look at what Labour's been doing, it's been trying to open up a more nuanced debate over immigration. And we've spoken a lot about immigration tonight, but I think there's a world of difference between the different types of refugees, economic migrants that are coming into the country. And I think we need a framework that addresses each of those cases fairly. That's what Shabana Mahmood is doing at the moment, and she's earned applause from people on the Labour left all the way through to Reform. So she must be doing something right.
Who on the Labour left she earned applause from? And in what way is she, in a nuanced way, carving out the difference between different things? I mean, that's...
taking the wristwatches and rings off people. It's clearly a nuanced way.
Well, look, I think when you go to the job centre and you claim job seekers allowance, one of the questions they will ask you is, do you have savings over a certain amount? I think currently it might be around £10,000. If you have more than £10,000 of savings, you don't get your job seekers allowance. I think it's fair if people already have assets, already have money that they can use, that we don't give them more money, that they exhaust that first. I think that's entirely reasonable and fair. The alternative is getting working people to pay. I don't think that's fair at all.
Why couldn't you let people work so they can pay for themselves and pay taxes and pay into the system rather than... And also, it's a ludicrous thing. I mean, first of all, we're told it's going to be jewellery, and then obviously people get very upset because, for example, my family, my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents fleeing pogroms in Europe, obviously brought some jewellery or whatever they could with them, and the idea that you would tear that off them is absolutely sickening. So then they said, oh, no, what we're talking about is e-scooters, as if people are bringing over expensive e-scooters that really is the thing that they're going to mortgage to pay for accommodation or the £49 a week people get. Look, if you want to bring down the number of people that we're paying for, you need to process their cases quickly, and we also need to allow people to work so they can contribute to society. At the moment, people are not allowed to support themselves, and they're held in this ridiculous limbo where no cases are processed within 6 months.
Gwaine, what did you want to add?
Well, we have obviously a clearly different approach to these things than Labour. We believe that anybody who arrives illegally should not be given leave to return and should be deported, period. End of story. That's just how it is. But I don't think we'd be nicking their rings off them as they arrived and sending them back. I think that if you look at the Danish model that the Labour Party have looked at to a certain extent, the amount that people are offered to go back is significantly greater than that which the government is suggesting. Obviously, Denmark being a smaller country has a smaller problem, but our concern is that particularly the Boris wave that came in under the Tory party after Brexit, where they basically stitched up the system, that is going to be coming into the ability to earn, or not earn, to take benefits. And that we think is a deep, deep concern. So we need to stop that. But I think that the Labour Party is rhetorically speaking in a reformy type way on migration, on asylum, on refugees and the rest. But I do not believe that it has the bottom or the bottle to do it. I can't see this Labour Party being able to put the stuff that the Home Secretary was saying through the House of Commons, through the House of Lords, through the Judicial Review, with the ECHR still in place, with the Human Rights Act still in place. And she talks about sending people back to when their country becomes safe. If they're refugees, the country becomes safe, they should go home. Well, I don't think that's an arguable case. Of course, they don't need to be refugees if their country is safe. But who defines what is safe? And it's not going to be the Home Secretary, it's going to be the courts. And the courts are not going to allow that to happen.
We're almost out of time, but let me just get a response from our other two panellists on that. Daniel, is it going to go through? Is this going to be claimed a great success?
Well, I think it's still in development. I think there'll be loads of discussions within the Parliamentary Labour Party around the shape that takes. So it's in the pipeline. I think a lot of what's being discussed around that has been quite sensationalist. All this taking jewellery off people is a bit ridiculous, if you ask me. I think what we're talking about is if you have the assets to back yourself already, you shouldn't be getting more money from the state. And I do want to pick up on this point that we should just let everyone through and make them work. Loads of people coming over are undocumented. Migrants. There's a reason that people come across the channel in small boats as opposed to more official routes. It's a variety of reasons, but one of the main reasons is that they don't think they'd be passed through the ordinary channels. So I think there's something there that letting that type of person work, undocumented migrants, potentially with criminal backgrounds, isn't going to be a smart idea.
Okay, we're almost out of time. James, just briefly, final word from you on that.
Well, the vast majority of people who are crossing in small boats are granted eventually refugee status because the three largest countries they come from are Afghanistan, Sudan and Eritrea. I don't see why, and the reason why they don't come another route is there is no other route to come. If you are fleeing a civil war in Sudan, there isn't a way that you can pitch up in Britain that isn't incredibly dangerous. That doesn't mean they are a threat to us. It means we have an incredibly badly designed asylum system, which forces people, if they wish to try to come here, to do so dangerously and undocumented. That is the problem. The problem is not with the people trying to come here.
Well, perhaps we'll get all three of you back as this immigration debate continues. We'll get you all back to drill down on that a little bit deeper as well. But for now, we're out of time. We really appreciate your contribution. Gwaine Towler, the political strategist who serves on Reform's UK Board of Governors. James Schneider, Communications Director for the Progressive International and former campaign director for the former Labor leader Jeremy Corbyn. And Daniel Shearer, the former Labor Party parliamentary candidate and author on Substack. Thanks for being on Counterpoints. And thank you for tuning in from home to this episode of Counterpoints for that very interesting debate on UK politics. Keep up to date with all of our latest debates and interviews on Al Arabiya English on YouTube, and you can follow us on X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.